Okay, imagine this scene. It's a Friday afternoon, Western Sydney, April 24th, 2015.
Right.
You've got this chaotic police pursuit. It's hurtling through the streets, and it ends up near Castlereagh Road in Penrith.
Mm-hmm.
A stolen car finally grinds to a halt. And two figures, they just bolt from the vehicle.
Straight into the bushland there. Dense, tangled stuff.
Exactly. And one of those figures was 22-year-old Jordan Morris.
Just 22.
He ran into that thick scrub, desperate to get away from the police after this chase.
And then, well, he was simply gone.
Gone. How does someone running from the police into bushland, how do they just vanish without a trace?
Yeah.
That's really the mystery we're diving into today.
And then the way we're going to approach this is purely by looking at the sources you shared with us. So we've got coronial inquest material.
Right.
Details from missing persons registers, news reports covering it all.
So the mission is basically to unpack these documents, this information.
Exactly. Pull out the key insights, the facts, what these specific sources tell us about the case.
Getting to the heart of what's known, or maybe what isn't known, based only on this material.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's dive right into those first critical moments. Jordan and the other man, they run from the car. Police are right there, aren't they? Moving in.
Absolutely. The sources show a really rapid response, police vehicles converging.
Yeah.
Polair, the helicopter, was overhead almost immediately, giving that crucial eye in the sky.
And they had dogs, too.
Yep. A sniffer dog deployed pretty much instantly to start searching that area.
But even with all that happening, that immediate police presence, there was one last reliable sighting of Jordan.
There was. Witnesses near the fence line of Heartland Motors saw him.
And what did the sources say about that moment? What did they see?
Well, the accounts we have describe Jordan struggling a lot in really thick vegetation there.
Like proper dense bush.
Yeah, specifically mentioning things like blackberry bushes, really difficult ground cover, and he was seen appearing quite worn out.
Okay, exhausted.
Looked exhausted, and this sighting placed him moving sort of westerly.
Which way is that pointing?
Towards the Nepean River, and after that moment, well, that's when the trail of reliable sightings just goes cold.
Okay, let's break this down a bit. So Jordan and another man, they flee the car.
Right. Joshua Hines.
Joshua Hines. Police are right there searching. But they didn't actually catch Jordan in that first sweep. They caught Hines.
That's correct. Hines was apprehended. The sources say he reportedly twisted his ankle, which, apparently stopped him running effectively. He was found hiding in some bushes behind the water treatment plant.
And Polair helped find him. The helicopter.
Yeah, the chopper was key in locating Hines. Using visuals, infrared,
Wow.
they relayed his position down to the dog handler on the ground. But Jordan, he kept going, evaded that initial police cordon.
So Hines is caught, but Jordan's still out there, running. Last seen looking exhausted, heading for the river. And the sources mentioned the dog handler, Senior Constable Bennett, actually scaling the fence at Heartland Motors based on that sighting.
Exactly. And his police dog, Otis, straight away picked up a human scent there.
And followed it.
Followed it directly towards the riverbank.
Okay, so police are searching hard, all these resources deployed. The dog has a scent leading right to the river.
Right to the edge.
What was the immediate result of that first day's search, that Friday, April 24th?
Well, the search effort that afternoon, it was significant. A large number of officers, 3 dog units, 2 Polair helicopters combing the area.
Sounds pretty intense.
It went on for over 2 hours. But ultimately, they didn't find Jordan. It was unsuccessful.
And the officers involved then, people like Senior Constable Bennett, Detective Superintendent McFadden, they initially thought Jordan had just gotten away, slipped through.
That seems to have been their initial assessment, yes. When they called off the search around 5 p.m. that day,
Right.
Detective Superintendent McFadden, according to the accounts, was pretty clear in his belief that Jordan had managed to evade their cordon.
But obviously that wasn't the end of it. He was still missing.
No, not at all. Because he didn't turn up, and his father formally reported him missing in late May 2015.
Okay, so about a month later.
Yeah. And once that report was filed confirming he hadn't just reappeared somewhere, that triggered major search operations specifically focused on finding him.
And these later searches, the sources detailed just how extensive they were.
Oh, very thorough. Starting in June 2015, there were these major land and water searches. They really concentrated on that river corridor around Boundary Creek.
The area where he was heading?
Exactly. Extending westward towards where it meets the Nepean River, and they threw significant resources at it.
Like what sort of resources?
Police, SES, RFS volunteers came in to help clear vegetation, create access tracks.
Wow.
Police divers searching the water, and even cadaver dogs. Dogs specifically trained to detect human remains.
That sounds incredibly comprehensive.
Yeah.
Covering land, water, clearing areas, but still nothing.
Despite all those efforts repeated over several months, June, October, November 2015, across land and water, no sign of Jordan was ever found.
So how did they get to the primary theory then? The one presented at the coronial inquest, that he likely drowned, especially with no body found after all that searching.
Yeah, that's a key question. And this is where the specific conditions on that day become really crucial. And also where hindsight and some expert analysis came into play for the inquest.
Sure.
Firstly, the weather. Leading up to April 24th, it had been extreme. The sources point out the Penrith area had just received its 7th highest rainfall volume since 1925.
7th highest. Wow, so the rivers must have been
Huge. Swollen. Boundary Creek, the Nepean River, they were running incredibly high and fast because of all that rain.
right.
And the inquest heard from an expert oceanographer, Dr. Tate. He looked at these conditions.
What was his view?
His assessment was that anyone entering that water, turbulent, fast-flowing like that, would face extreme difficulty. Staying afloat, swimming, just incredibly hard.
So easily swept away.
He believed they'd likely be swept downstream, maybe for kilometers, or they could easily get tangled in debris, vegetation along the banks, or even underwater.
A really dangerous situation.
Very dangerous.
Yeah, what about Senior Constable Bennett, the dog handler? You said initially they thought Jordan escaped on land. Did his view change?
Yes, and that detail about his dog, Otis, became quite important when they looked back during the inquest.
How so?
Bennett reflected on Otis's behavior that afternoon. The dog was clearly on a human scent, heading towards the river. But the trail just stopped. Abruptly. Right at the riverbank.
Didn't go along the bank, just stopped at the edge.
Exactly. And in hindsight, that sudden stop strongly suggested that Jordan had actually entered the water right there, rather than finding some other way to escape on land nearby.
So you combine the expert view on the river conditions treacherous with the dog handler's observation about the scent stopping at the water's edge.
It starts to build a pretty compelling picture pointing towards the river.
So what were the key findings from the coronial inquest then, based on all this evidence laid out in the sources?
Well, the inquest, which was overseen by Deputy State Coroner Graham, it reached some very clear conclusions based on the material presented.
Okay.
The main finding was that Jordan Morris is dead.
Officially declared dead.
Yes. The coroner concluded he died on or soon after April 24th, 2015. And the location was determined as being in the vicinity of Boundary Creek, Peachtree Creek, and the Nepean River in Penrith.
So a formal legal finding of death, even without a body ever being recovered.
Exactly. That's a significant outcome you see in these sources. It mentions the legal standard required, needing clear, cogent proof, often called the Briginshaw standard in these cases.
But they couldn't say exactly how he died, the medical cause.
No, that remained unknown. I mean, it seems likely he got into trouble in that powerful river.
Right.
But the sources note they couldn't definitively rule out, say, fatal injuries from struggling in that incredibly thick undergrowth near the riverbank before maybe entering the water. But the manner of death was determined. The coroner found his death occurred during or shortly after his attempt to evade police following that car chase, which classified it legally as a death in the course of police operations.
Right. And the inquest also looked at whether police needed, maybe, a new protocol for situations like this. Someone fleeing into a dangerous place like that river system.
Yeah, that point was definitely discussed. Counsel for Jordan's family argued that point, suggesting that even if an earlier water search wouldn't have found him alive, maybe finding his remains could have offered some certainty.
Makes sense.
The coroner acknowledged that, the value in thinking about lessons learned, but ultimately decided against making a formal recommendation for a specific new protocol at that time.
But the findings were passed on.
Yes,
Yeah.
forwarded to the Commissioner of Police so they could consider the complex issues the case raised.
And just quickly, did the investigation look into other possibilities? Like, what if Jordan had somehow survived and just disappeared deliberately? Maybe fleeing because of the chase itself? I think the sources mention a possible link to an ice run.
Yes, absolutely. The investigation, as the sources detail, looked very thoroughly into that possibility. They did extensive checks.
Like what kind of checks?
Well, for instance, inquiries with the Department of Immigration and Border Protection. Jordan was recorded as on shore. No evidence he'd left Australia or even applied for or used a passport since that day. They also check police systems, NSW, federal, interstate, for any contact he might have had with law enforcement since April 24th, 2015.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing recorded. Zero contact. Same with the RMS system, the roads and traffic authority, no activity under his name.
What about digitally?
Yeah.
Social media or
No.
talking to people he knew?
His Facebook activity was checked. No posts or activity attributed to him after April 24th. His last post was apparently April 10th.
Okay.
And police interviewed his known associates, including, others involved in the events of that day. None reported any contact with him since he disappeared.
They searched places he stayed?
Yes, locations he was known to sometimes stay at were searched. Again, no trace.
So, based purely on everything the investigation found and the inquest findings detailed in these sources, there was just no credible evidence suggesting Jordan was still alive out there somewhere.
That was the firm conclusion drawn from the body of evidence presented, yes. The picture you get from these sources is really one of a desperate attempt to escape.
Yeah.
In incredibly tough, dangerous terrain. An attempt that the evidence overwhelmingly suggests ended tragically in that powerful river environment.
And that lack of a body, that physical absence, the impact must be immense.
The sources do touch on the human side, right? Mentioning a GoFundMe and this idea of ambiguous loss.
They do. The GoFundMe was set up to help his family, provide support, and yes, ambiguous loss is mentioned specifically regarding the family's ongoing struggle.
What exactly does that mean?
It's a term used for that unique, incredibly difficult kind of grief when someone is missing, when there's no body, no final definitive confirmation of death.
Just exactly. The sources describe the pain of being stuck in that not knowing basket, caught between hope, maybe, and the grim reality the evidence points to. You can't fully grieve, can't truly let go because there isn't that absolute certainty.
And his mother, Jane McGonigal, the sources say she's spoken publicly about holding on to hope.
Yes, she has expressed that enduring hope he might still be alive, which really highlights that agonizing struggle with ambiguous loss.
It sounds like an absolutely unimaginable position for a family to be in.
Truly.
So if we pull together everything from the sources we've looked at here, the evidence points very strongly to a young man's life ending tragically.
In or near that turbulent river on that chaotic afternoon during a police pursuit.
But the exact details of how he died, and crucially, the location of his body, those remain unknown.
That is the core picture you get from these specific materials, yes. A flight from police entering a highly dangerous environment, huge searches, finding nothing.
Expert analysis supporting a drowning theory.
A formal finding of death by the coroner, but still that persistent, heartbreaking lack of physical proof.
So it leaves you, the listener, with a lot to think about, doesn't it? When the evidence piles up, strong enough for that formal finding of death, but there's never a body recovered.
Yeah.
What does that enduring physical absence mean for our ideas about proof in an investigation, for justice, and maybe most importantly for a family's ability to ever find real peace or closure?
And it also makes you consider the limits, perhaps, the limits that nature itself, its power, its complexity can place on even the most thorough investigation's ability to give us every single definitive answer.
A lot to consider indeed.